Alright, so in this video, I will be explaining RSA, but I'll sort of trying to explain RSA in a unique way, in the sense that, like, most explanations that you see online, they seem sort of like contrived, and they just sort of present to you the steps. I sort of want to explain it where I don't just present to you all the steps. I sort of build this motivated um, explanation, so it doesn't seem contrived. I mean, obviously, some parts might still seem contrived, but the idea is that, like, it seems at least motivated. Like, things don't seem random. Like, you never want to look at math and say, "Oh, this seems random, but it works, so I guess I'll just run with the flow." It's sort of like every step has some purpose, right? Some story to tell. That's sort of my idea behind explaining this algorithm. So, I recommend, and I'm assuming that you already sort of know how the discrete log problem in RSA and Diffie-Hellman works. And if you actually noticed in Diffie-Hellman, we never actually like. So yes, you do talk over a private channel you do talk over an insecure channel, um, Alice and Bob, without Eve intercepting, unless she just solves the discrete log problem, which is very hard to solve. But the idea is that, like, in Diffie-Hellman, you just created a shared secret key. Like, you didn't actually send an actual message over. Like, if I wanted to send some message M, like, if I'm Alice and this is Bob, and I wanted to send us and what I want Alice wanted to send some message M over to B, that never actually happened in Diffie-Hellman. You just created a key, and you can actually use that key to do some nonsense on other things. On other messages, so you can, like, encrypt other messages, use that with that shared secret key, and that's actually in something called algomal, which I'll talk about in another video. But the idea is that Diffie-Hellman, the whole goal is that, like, you just create a key, and it's a shared key, and you can do whatever you want with it, but you never actually got to send a message that you wanted between Alice and Bob. In RSA, it's not like this, right? You can actually I think RSA is a symmetric algorithm, and Diffie-Hellman is an asymmetric algorithm. You can search up the terminologies. I don't really care about the terminologies that much, um, but but that's where the distinction is. In RSA, you can actually send messages across that you want to, but in Diffie-Hellman, you can only just have some shared secret key in which that you can use that key to do stuff on things that you want to do. Like, so for example, if Alice and Bob have this shared secret key in Diffie-Hellman, they might use that key to, have, like, this secret, like, lock on other things. You know what I'm saying? So that's what you can do with Diffie-Hellman, but you can't do that with RSA. Um, I mean, that's what you can do in Diffie-Hellman, but in RSA you can actually send messages across. So now enough of that yapping. Let's sort of jump into RSA. So, the RSA sort of follows actually the same format um, as a discrete log problem. It doesn't use the discrete log problem, but you'll see that, like, the equation that you need to crack in order to solve it is very similar to the discrete log problem. So recall the discrete log problem is like, I have some m and I raise it to the power of e, and that's congruent to some c mod n. And the idea here is that m is known, c is known, and n is known. And the idea here is that if you can find e, then you win. You solve the discrete log problem. And again, that's the idea that, like, in the Diffie-Hellman, if you can find either lowercase a or lowercase b, you basically win, because then you can take either a or b and exponentiate them to the little versions. Like, for example, you can take a and exponentiate it to b to get the secret key. You can take b and exponentiate it to a to get the secret key. So I'm just sort of rejogging your memory. Um, that's sort of like the discrete log problem type stuff, and that's why it's, like, useful, because you can crack Diffie-Hellman with it. That's just one way you can crack it. I don't think they've proven that this is the only way you can crack it yet. I'm not sure. But yeah, RSA actually uses this formula. But the idea here is that the distinction is that this time you know what E is, and you know what C is, you know what N is. You actually don't know what M is, and that's the distinction from Diffie-Hellman, is that you don't know the base now. Or in Diffie-Hellman, you knew the base and you didn't know the exponent. In RSA, you don't know the base and now you know the exponent. That's like how they're distinction. But it's actually quite kind of interesting. I find that it's interesting that these algorithms don't seem too related, but they use actually the same form, which I find pretty interesting in my opinion. Um, so and you notice that like I use different letters. Like I didn't just use like, or you might be asking why did I not use a to the x is congruent to b mod n. Well, it's because these letters actually mean something in RSA. So M, right, in RSA is going to stand for the message that you're sending. Because remember, like letters are just numbers. Like in reality, like when you type A into your keyboard, you're typing a binary string, right? So A is like 65, and whatever that is in binary, you're typing that. So really messages are just numbers. They're binary strings which are just numbers. So every message or every has literally just like a number like can be mapped to a number. That's pretty much the idea. So that's what makes this stuff kind of cool is that messages are really just numbers, so you can do math on them. Um, that's why number theory is a huge field in cryptography and sort of encrypting messages. So in RSA, M stands for message and E is the encryption exponent. So you'll see why it's the encryption exponent. And, C is the ciphertext. So the ciphertext as in this is the text that is encrypted and that, when Alice and Bob are talking, right, they want to talk in an encrypted message. Like you're not the actual message, they're not going to talk in the actual message because then Eve will be able to see what they want to talk. You want to talk into an encrypted message, you want to talk into a ciphertext. So that's the ciphertext, what C is. And then N is just the modulus. N is just used as a modulus for convention. But that's basically what's going on in RSA. And the idea is that if you can find what M is, if you can solve M to the E C mod N, and you can solve the unknown for M, then you can get this message. Then you can get the message and you win. And now I know probably some of you have heard that like RSA relies on the fact of like factoring out prime numbers or factoring a number into two primes, a large composite number into two primes. And right now, it does not seem like intuitive at all of why that's the case. And we'll get into that later. But sort of just like giving you some knowledge of like this RSA sort of idea. But now we're going to be actually fleshing this out. So we're going to be sort of now explaining RSA and sort of kind of motivating it. So the idea here is this, right? I have some message M, right? So Alice, so I'm gonna draw my setup, right? So we have Alice, and let me actually, whoops. So we have Alice. We have this channel that we want to communicate over. Whoops. And then we have, oops. This channel that we want to communicate over. Then we have Eve on the bottom. So with Eve on the bottom, then this is our setup. So with RSA, we want to send some message M across. So we're going to start off with this message M. So that's intuitive, obviously, or that doesn't seem contrived. We obviously want to send a message across. So we're going to start off with this message M that we want to send over in our public channel. Now, obviously, the idea here is that like Alice can't actually just send this over. Like, this is not going to work because then Eve can obviously just say, oh, I'm looking at it. Like, we're in a public room. Eve can be like, oh, I can just grab him. So the idea here is that we need to make some ciphertext. So, in Diffie-Hellman, when we were using like one-way functions and stuff, like, a lot of it was a lot of it was like exponentiation. Like we use exponentiation. It was like very easy to compute g to the a, mod p, or like g to the b mod p. But the idea was that like undoing this exponentiation and like to find like what a and or little b is was pretty hard. So you sort of steal from that idea and say, well, I want to exponentiate m, right? So I'm going to exponentiate m with some encryption exponent, and I'm going to send that over instead. So we're going to actually send this over instead. And this is like correct. So like because so this if this doesn't seem motivated, then let me just explain it again. So like the idea here is that like remember I'm gonna say in Diffie-Hellman, right? We took this g and we exponentiated it with a. It's sort of this one-way function. Very easy to do this, but if I wanted to sort of undo this exponentiation in the context of like retrieving a, it was pretty hard to do. And my hope is that um, because we said that you have to solve the discrete log problem in order to like kind of do that, right? To retrieve this a back, and that's a difficult problem to solve. So the idea here is that it's similar here. We're sort of stealing from Diffie-Hellman in the sense that it's very easy to exponentiate things because we have like something called fast exponentiation or binary exponentiation, which I sort of want to talk about. But that's sort of the idea is that it's in CS it's like pretty well known or like easy to sort of exponentiate things, which is why exponentiation is sort of like a good one-way function, very easy to do, sort of very hard to like undo. So in this case, like we want to undo it not in the sense of like the exponent. We don't like Eve doesn't care about the exponent. We don't actually care about the exponent, right? Like Eve wants to know what m is. She wants to know what the message is. So sort of we're undoing this exponentiation in the in the from the perspective of the base that we want to find what the base is. We don't want to actually find what the e is. We want to find what the base is. So we're the hopes is that like the exponentiation is very easy to do m to the e, but it's going to be very hard to sort of undo m to the e in the context of finding what the base is. So in logarithms, you find what the exponent is, but in this case, we're sort of finding what the base is. So it's a little bit switched, right? But Alice will send m to the e over. And the idea here is that when Bob gets m to the e, right, he's gonna have to undo this m to the e. And so the idea is that Bob is so this is the ciphertext that we're sending over. So I'm going to set this to be equal to c. But when Bob gets the C, he's going to have to decrypt C to actually get M. But the idea here is that when he's decrypting C, there must be some trapdoor that he has, or like, I don't really like to use trapdoor. I think hint is just better. There must be some hint that is only that only Bob knows and Eve doesn't, so that when he receives C, he can easily decrypt this, right? So the idea here is that we have to think about what are some ways that so this is also this should be in mod n. So let me just say this should be in mod n. Everything we do is going to be in mod n, and the reason for this is because in like cryptography you work with something called finite fields. It's sort of this idea that like we don't have like infinite space, so like n is gonna like you can just think about it as we're using mod n because like we don't have infinite space or like infinite memory, so like we need to make sure that like we use like actually like mod n, like because computers don't have infinite like space, so that's why like we're using modules n, because like the fields we're working with have to be finite, like in the context of computers, like again we don't have infinite space, so that's why we're using mod n. So we'll use this m to the e mod n, we'll send this over, and that's Bob is going to have c, and the idea is that we need to be able to retrieve m easily because we have a hint that Eve doesn't. Um, but before we sort of think about what that hint is, let's just think about the ways that Bob can sort of undo this exponentiation. So this is going to seem a little contrived, but the idea in RSA is that to undo the exponentiation, you're actually to undo the exponentiation or like to find what the message is, or like to find what m is, Bob is gonna do an exponentiation again. So Bob is going to say, maybe I can decrypt C by raising it to some power D, right? So like I'll take this m, so this is m to the ed, and if I do this in mod n, the idea here is that I'm going to get m back, which you can assume that m is like less than n. Like again, yeah. So you're going to get m back. So that's sort of the idea, is that in RSA, to sort of get m back, we're going to exponentiate it again and hope that we can get m back. So the idea is that, like, how could we do this? So the idea is, when you do m to the ed, right? Like, you want this to equal, we're going to assume everything is in mod n, by the way. You can go into mod n or something. Where technically I'm setting C as m to the mod n. So the idea here is that, like, but maybe using, we're working in mod n, by the way. But the idea is that I want to get m back, right? So I want m to the ed in mod n to really be m. And so I'm just going to sort of like say this is m, and this is pretty creative, by the way. So this is going to feel a little contrived. You have to be creative in math. That's non-negotiable, right? But the idea here is that I want to get m back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this as m times ed to the ed minus 1. And then this is where the magic sort of happens, is that, like, if you write this as m times m to the ed minus 1, the idea is that you want this stuff over here, because you just want m. You want to, right? You want this stuff to be 1. And so in the context of modulus, right? In the context of modulus, right? There's this famous theorem that states, like, Euler's Totient Theorem. So again, you would have to know this in order to, like, come up with this magic. But there's this famous theorem that states that, like, for some a and m, so the GCD of these are integers. The GCD is 1. So for some pair a and m, if you have a and then a modulus n, like, and then you raise this to the phi of n, which you can search up what this is, called the phi function. It will quickly explain what that is. Then you basically get 1 back. So a to the phi of n is congruent to 1 mod n. And I'm not going to prove this because this is not really insightful to RSA, I would think. I actually don't know the proof on top of my head. I think it has something to do with, like, if you take, like, all the relatively prime numbers and you multiply them by a, then it's the same set. I don't know why. I haven't looked into it. But the idea here is that in this context of RSA, this is a theorem that's really important, because what that will do for us is that it will make us have an idea on how to make this 1, because the idea is that we just want m and we want the stuff over here to be 1, right? So basically the whole idea is that, if really, this is also, like, something that you should know, that, like, a to the phi of n for, like, any multiple of k, right, that's still going to be 1 mod n. Like, so basically you can extend this as, like, if you have a and you raise this to any multiple of phi of n, you're going to get 1 back in mod n. So you can think of this more generally. You're like, for the Euler Totient Theorem, right? This is sort of like a more general form, is like, or like more general statement to say that if you have a and m and they're relatively prime and you raise a to any multiple of the phi of n, you're always going to get 1 back, because the idea is that a to the phi of n is always 1. So then, and then 1 to the k is obviously 1. So the idea here is sort of to say, well, okay, if I want this to be 1, then I would want ed minus 1 to be a multiple of phi of n. Like, as long as it's a multiple of phi of n, right, that's the general case. It doesn't have to be phi of n. It just has to be some multiple of phi of n. As long as it's some multiple of phi of n, then I know that I can get 1 back in mod n, right? I'm going to be able to get, I guess let me just use uppercase n. But as long as it's a multiple of phi of n, then I know for a fact that when I plug that in, I'm going to get 1. So, but then here's where the magic of math comes again, is you notice that if you actually, like, rearrange this equation, this looks like the definition of modulus. In fact, it is. Basically, what it's saying is that ed is 1 plus the multiple of phi of n times k, or ed is 1 plus a multiple of phi of n. That's the definition of modulus. This is saying that ed is congruent to 1 mod phi of n. So you can use the definition of a modulus. And then then this is important because you have ed is congruent to 1 mod phi of n, and basically now you know is that what this means is that to find what d is, right, this is like the multiplicative inverse, right? Like, and we know how to find multiplicative inverses. So this motivates us to do this, right? Because this looks like very similar, because in multiplicative inverses, you have ax is congruent to 1 mod n, and if a and n, if the GCD of a and n is 1, then there exists a multiplicative inverse. And this has to do with the extended Euclidean algorithm. If you write this out and then turn it into a Diophantine equation, you can prove that um, they have to be relatively prime for some solution to work. And so basically the GCD of these have to be 1. And so the idea here is that finding multiplicative inverses can be found through the extended Euclidean algorithm. So this motivates us to actually write an extra condition. So when we're exponentiating m, what we want it to satisfy that the GCD of e and the phi of n, the modulus we're using, is 1. That way, um, in that sense, because then a d will exist. Like if this is not satisfied, then no d exists. So we need to choose an exponent such that a d actually exists, such that there actually is a multiplicative inverse. So when we choose e, we need to make sure that it satisfies these conditions. The GCD of e and phi of n is 1. So that's what we'll do, right? And so then we have this condition satisfied, and then um, this motivates. So now we sort of have this clear picture. Is all we have to do is set uh, d as if d is the multiplicative inverse of e in modulo phi of n, we can raise that to m. To c, we can do c to that d, right, and we'll get m back, as shown. And now the idea is so oops, I keep on using lowercase n. I guess it doesn't really matter. So that's sort of the workings, right? So basically, what Bob has to do is if he can compute phi of n, all he needs is phi of n, because then if he has phi of n, I mean, e is going to be public, by the way. So when we exponentiate m to the e, this will be, we don't care about privatizing e. We don't need to do some magic on e to make sure that it's encrypted too. We'll just say, hey, whatever, we don't care. E will be public, so e will be made public. So we'll have m to the e, and that will be public information. And so then when we send that over, right, all Bob needs to do is, his goal is to find some d, so which is a multiplicative inverse of e in mod phi of n. If you find phi of n, then you just use the extended Euclidean algorithm to find the multiplicative inverse um, of d, and then it's over. So basically the goal of Bob is to find what this phi of n is. So then the idea here is that how do we make it easy for Bob to find phi of n, but very hard for Eve to find phi of n? What hint can we give to Bob that Eve would not be able to have accessible? And this is when the product of primes play a large role. Also, give me a second. Someone is calling me. And this is where the product of primes play a large role. So the idea here is that we want Bob to very easily calculate phi of n, and we want Eve to have to struggle. And so if you look at the formulas for phi of n, you'll notice that if you have a product of two primes, the formula is going to be p minus 1 times q minus 1. And so the idea is that if Bob knows basically if and so what that will be is that will be PQ minus q. Hold on a second. Whoops. Oh, wait, hold up. I know how to do this. I'm just thinking about something else, but let me just write this out. So, obviously, I know how to factor FOIL, but I was just thinking about something else. And then pop. Okay. So, if this is the expression, so the idea here is that, like, it will be very, basically, if you know what P and Q are, wait a second. I'm thinking about something because something doesn't seem to make sense. Give me a second. Oh, whoops, guys. Oh, I'm wearing my glasses. Yeah, I had to actually, because I was actually confused myself. Um, so yeah, I did a little thinking and I realized that there's a misconception I had. So, yeah, again, you want Bob to have a very easy time finding the phi of n, but you want Eve to have a very hard time finding the phi of n. Because again, if you can find the phi of n, we can easily find d because we just find use the extended Euclidean algorithm to find the multiplicative inverse, which you can do very quickly. You can do it logarithmically actually, but that doesn't really matter here. So the idea here is that again, phi of n has this property that if you have like two prime numbers, it's gonna be very easy to like find phi of n because you just do p minus one times q minus one. And but so what Bob can do is actually he can set Bob is actually going to be the one. So let me make a correction. Bob will actually be the one to set the. So initially it seemed like Alice was the one setting the modulus, but the mod n that we use is actually set by Bob. So Bob sets the modulus because he basically multiplies two really large prime numbers together, um, and um, and so that's why like n is so everyone knows what n is, the modulus, but it seemed as when I was doing that, it seemed like Alice set the modulus. No, Bob actually sends the modulus. So if you actually throw the Alice in, Bob sends it. But the idea is that when he's setting the modulus, you want phi of n to be very easy to compute for Bob himself. That's why you use two prime numbers, because all you have to do is do p minus 1 times q minus 1, right? And then you can find the decryption exponent, where Bob can easily find the decryption exponent very easily. I noticed that like Alice doesn't really need to know what p and q are, because again, like you have to think about it logically. Only one person is going to know what p and q is, because in order to like, because the thing is, how are they both going to agree on P and Q without Eve knowing? Then you need to do a whole encryption scheme, and maybe you can use Diffie-Hellman to generate like two prime numbers, which would be like two shared secrets, and then it would be chill. But notice that only Bob will know what P and Q are, and then he'll just like use those to multiply it. And the idea here is that for Bob, it's very easy to find phi of n, right? Because that's the goal that we want. We want phi of n to be very easy to find for Bob, but very hard for Eve, because you can just use p minus 1 times q minus 1. But if you look at it from Eve's perspective, Eve only knows what n is, and Eve is not going to know what phi of n is. Only Bob will know that because he's going to need that to find what d is. And so the idea is that the only way that Eve can find phi of n is if she knows the amount of factors. If she knows the amount of factors that are relatively prime to PQ, which are basically, these are two very large primes that are multiplied together, and that's going to be very difficult to brute force. That's going to be insane to brute force. If you multiply two really large numbers, you can't just go from one to the square root of n, or do you? That's to check if a number is prime. My bad. But it's gonna be very hard to like find the number of numbers that are relatively co-prime. And you can also try to use the formula too, but for like phi of n. But then that would also mean that in order to find phi of n, like another way, Eve would have to be able to factor n. And if Eve factors n, she can find p and q and then compute p minus 1 times q minus 1, which is phi of n. But notice that like integer factorization has been proven to be very difficult to solve, which is sort of why we use it in RSA, because it'll be very hard for Eve to undo this multiplication of two prime numbers. But for Bob, it's very easy because Bob is the person who knows the two primes. So all he has to do to find phi of n is do p minus 1 times q minus 1. He just has to do multiplication. Whereas Eve doesn't set the primes, so Eve doesn't have that hint that Bob does. And so Eve only just sees the number and he has to calculate phi of n. And that's only going to be accomplished if he can factor that number out. Or like literally just brute force it and count the amount of numbers that are relatively prime with um, uh, that relatively prime to n and itself, right? So as you can see, that's the motivation of using the p minus 1, q minus 1, or using the pq, is that like you can just have it very easy for Bob but very hard for Eve. And then, yeah, that's the idea. So that's sort of motivation. Now we're going to clearly, now once we've talked about this, I think it's very easy because it's all over the place. We can actually just talk about what actually, like, we can like put it all together and say what happens. So I'll just go through the steps. So now everything seems really motivated. When I talk about the steps, they're going to make so much sense. It's not going to feel contrived anymore. It's going to make actual sense. So what happens is we have, I don't really want to use different colors. I just want to go quickly here. We have Alice and Bob, and so what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen is that Bob is going to, and this is also what I think that a lot of places don't make clear, is that Bob is gonna be the one that he's going to decide on two large primes. So Alice is trying to communicate some message over M, which is M. But before that happens, Bob is going to agree on two large primes. He's going to say, okay, he's going to set N as the modulus. And you have to understand that this is going to be in the public space. So N will be the modulus. And then Bob is also going to select some E, such that the GCD of E and the phi of n, which can be written, let me just do this, phi of n, which can be written as GCD p minus 1 p does this. He's gonna find some E, and that's gonna be the encryption exponent. And this is also gonna be public. It really doesn't matter if this is public. So this will go to the public space, and then Alice will have her message M, which is, she wants to send that to Bob, and she's basically going to send M to the E, which is the ciphertext, over. So she'll send over C, which is the ciphertext, over to Bob. And basically, we don't care that it's public because the idea is that we have the encryption exponent. And in order to get that message M, which is private, you have to like cut off that E, which can be done using finding the multiplicative inverse, obviously. If the multiplicative inverse of E in modulo phi of n, which we showed earlier. And so Alice will send over that M to the E. And now what Bob has to do, all he has to do is find the multiplicative inverse of E in mod phi of n. So all he has to do is find this. And this can be done really quickly by using the extended Euclidean algorithm. And then he will find this very quickly using extended Euclidean algorithm. And it'll be very hard for Eve to do anything, because what Eve has to do is Eve has to factor n, or find, basically she has to find phi of n. And one of the ways she can do that is by factoring n. But it's going to be very hard. This is one of the ways, but that's not the only way, I think. Or there is no proof that's the only way. I'm not sure. But she has to find even, which is going to be very hard. But basically, once Bob will find D, and he'll take C and raise it to the D. And Bob will finally get that message M. And once he gets that message M, he's chilling. So yeah, that's basically the overview. And the entire process makes a lot more sense now that we sort of motivated this stuff. Okay, I'll see y'all later. Probably posting about algebra. Probably should have done that after Diffie-Hellman, but yeah, this is pretty cool. And we're done.